absolutely. So there is a difference between therapist, counselor, psychiatrist, psychologist, mostly in the level of education that they have received. So therapists and counselors, actually those two terms are usually both within the therapy world, but also outside of the therapy world, sort of interchangeably often used. But often a therapist is somebody who's trained to do a lot of diagnoses. So they understand the DSM-5 TR and how to label and support a particular type of diagnosis, whereas a counselor is more focused on behavioral changes, day-to-day life resources, sort of supporting people from I need to work on my decision making, that kind of thing. But they also intersect a lot. So most of the time when I'm working with a client, I don't focus a lot on the diagnosis piece. I do provide a diagnosis for insurance purposes, but I don't get caught up in the diagnosis piece. I'm more concerned with how are you managing your life on a day-to-day basis, what is happening for you, how can we support you, what resources, those kind of things, right? But both of those therapists and counselors they all have master's level degrees. They've all had to take a qualifying exam, had to been supervised and licensed in their appropriate state. So they're all similar in that. Psychologists also usually have PhD level training. So another notch above. The issue with that is, of course, their price is also going to be more. So if you look, for example, on Psychology Today and you see a social worker, her fee, let's say, is $150. And if you look for a psychologist, you'll probably see the fee more like $200 to $250. So there will be a difference there. They have a little bit more training. Psychiatrists are the only one of the bunch who can prescribe medications because they are physician trained. So they really are physicians who are specifically their area of expertise is the mental health psychiatric medication piece. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah. Yeah, and I didn't take any medication. I actually refused because I was it was part of my trauma, right? Because Orion died during the night and I felt like I, wasn't there. If I had been there, that maybe I could have done something. For a long time I told myself that story, and part of my trauma was sleeping and worrying that something would happen to Maverick while I was sleeping. And I just didn't want to be altered in any way, even, during the day. So I refused to take any kind of medication. And thankfully for me, I managed to come out the other side. But so does that mean if there's somebody who maybe starts working with a counselor or a therapist, and then at some point during their work with them, it becomes recommended or maybe obvious that they need to consider or explore a medication route, that they'll need to switch? Or do they just contact a psychiatrist and then work with them on the medication piece?
Yeah, they wouldn't necessarily. See, the thing about psychiatrists are yes, you go in for your initial consult typically, and they do a whole assessment and work with you in terms of the type of medication that would make sense. But then typically, they'll not meet with you very regularly, and the appointments will be really focused specifically on the medication, not on the ongoing support that you might need, that you would receive through a counselor, a therapist, or a psychologist. So typically people will see a psychiatrist just for that added additional piece. And also sometimes PCPs, regular general practitioners can prescribe some of these medications. So they wouldn't necessarily have to seek a psychiatrist's services. it's going to be sort of up to them what they think makes
Right.
sense.
Well, that makes
Yeah.
sense. So if you're concerned that that's the route you're going to need to take, or you don't necessarily have to immediately seek out the psychiatrist who's the more expensive option, you could still start with a counselor or a therapist. And
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
And if I thought as I was working with somebody that adding some sort of psychiatric medication might make sense, then we'd be talking about, do you have a psychiatrist? Do you know somebody you can connect with? Do you want to talk to your PCP about it first?